Welcome to all of our viewers from across the country, and thank you to those of you participating who will meet shortly. World War II veterans Lois Boughton, Mr. George Ellers, World War II Museum Vice President of Education Access, Colonel Peter D. Crane, and Coast Guard Atlantic Area Historian Dr. William Thiessen. My name's Phil, and I host They Had to Go Out podcast, where I help people tell their most dangerous, daring, and epic sea stories. I'm excited to be part of today's second Stories That Matter virtual event, hosted by the National Coast Guard Museum Association. The stories you'll hear today are exactly why we're building the National Coast Guard Museum. The National Coast Guard Museum Association is committed to building a world-class museum that will honor the heritage of the Coast Guard and provide the public a gateway to discover Coast Guard life. In its 80,000 square feet and 5 decks, it will showcase thousands of stories through interactive exhibits, programs, public and private partnerships, STEM-based educational programs, and leadership training opportunities. The incredible legacy of heroism, bravery, and professional competence demonstrated by this often unnoticed multi-mission service needs to be understood by American citizens, and the extraordinary work of the United States Coast Guard deserves to be preserved, memorialized, and honored, and currently it's the only armed service without a national museum. The Museum Association will deliver the museum through the When the Most is Expected capital campaign, a public-private partnership. To date, the Museum Association has reached $74.5 million in private, state, and federal commitments toward its $150 million goal, a momentum that continues to build from the announcement of a 2024 museum opening by Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Carl Schultz. One of the wings of the museum will showcase the Coast Guard as defenders of our nation. This service has fought in every major American conflict since it was established 230 years ago. During each of these conflicts, its duties and technologies have evolved to better defend the nation against maritime threats. The museum will explore stories and display artifacts from the Second World War, a conflict during which the service supported both combat and traditional missions, and proved the Coast Guard is semper paratus, always ready. The Coast Guard expanded its service to a record of 250,000 personnel during the war. It's now been 75 years since the end of World War II, and we're pleased to have some special guests with us today to share their personal stories, discuss history, and the important role that the Coast Guard played in the conflict. If you have any questions, I encourage you to send them to us via the chat function for our question and answer session later today at the end of the broadcast. As we kick off today's discussion, I'd like to first introduce you to Coast Guard Atlantic Area Historian, Dr. William Thiessen. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Trying to read my notes here, Dr. Thiessen. Go ahead. I know you've got a prepared statement, sir, so I'd welcome you to read it.
Okay, by all means. So I just wanted to cover some general highlights of service history from World War II. I'm going to abscond with a few terms used for military agencies in the past, such as tip of the spear, because Coast Guard in many ways was really the first, in many respects, in serving in World War II. For example, it was really the first to carry out the war effort well before the actual entry of the U.S. into the war through neutrality patrols and the opening of the Greenland theater of operations, which was under the supervision of the Coast Guard. It was also the first military agency to seize an enemy-operated vessel, German vessel up in Greenland, captured the first German POWs of the war of any U.S. service, was second to sink a U-boat, served in every amphibious operation in many of the high seas conflicts that took place during World War II. And the Coast Guard, unbeknownst to many people, manned thousands of watercraft in World War II, literally thousands. These included not only small craft, which the Coast Guard was known for, such as landing craft, but they manned Army ships, hundreds of Army ships, troop transports, warships, command vessels, icebreakers, buoy tenders, and a whole lot more, operating many of the watercraft that were used and playing a vital role in the American war effort. Coast Guard was also the first service during World War II to develop helicopter technology, technology and aviation technology known to many today, both through military applications as well as civilian ones. And the Coast Guard was there preparing and experimenting with this technology from the start during World War II and turned it into what we know today. Also, the Coast Guard was the first to desegregate both officer and enlisted ranks with all minorities, including African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders, all served in officer and enlisted ranks in the Coast Guard during World War II. But the war was also a baptism of fire for the Coast Guard because prior to that, it was largely still a 19th century style agency, similar to the Revenue Cutter Service, its ancestor agency. But the World War II had a real transformative effect on the Coast Guard, not only because it grew exponentially in the first years of the war, but also its missions and the assets that it operated increased as well. About 250,000 personnel, men and women in the Coast Guard served during World War II. So it's far more than most people would even imagine. These people, like I mentioned before, manned thousands of watercrafts, but they also manned boat stations, commands, lighthouses, air stations, bases, a shipyard, and training bases. And they also were responsible for overseeing 30,000 different aids to navigation, both domestically and abroad. So their missions were many, many more than any other military agency. Their missions were not simply defense and combat related, but also port security, beach patrols, search and rescue, safety at sea, weather reporting, aviation, running land stations. So in many ways, the Coast Guard is kind of the silent service. It's one that's been forgotten during World War II because it had so many roles supporting the war effort. And I might add that during this period, 2 new agencies were added to the Coast Guard's mission set. Before it was the Life Saving Service and Ancestor Agency, as well as the Revenue Cutter Service. But in 1939, the Lighthouse Service was added to its repertoire. And then the Bureau of Marine Safety was added during World War II as well. So the missions that the Coast Guard carried out were myriad during this period, many more than any other military agency undertook during the war period. And one of the highlights of this period was the spars. The spars were the Coast Guard's equivalent to the waves of the WWII, the Women's Corps that served in military. And 12,000 women served in the Coast Guard during World War II. They served as code breakers, radio operators, photographers, chauffeurs, clerical administrative jobs, and a whole lot more ratings than just that. So they were able to free up a lot of active duty men and reserve men to go and fight in the war effort and take care of some of those jobs domestically. So they were a very important part of the service, and actually many of the first minority women to don a Coast Guard uniform served in the spars as well. African American, Asian American, and Hispanic American women served in the spars as well. So a very important part, and if you take the ratio of cutter namesakes that we have that served in the spars, it's far higher than any other branch of the service. So they're honored and considered one of the highlights of World War II personnel service. In any case, World War II was definitely a transformative event in the history of the Coast Guard, and one that really turned it into the modern agency that we know today. Thank you.
Dr. Thiessen, thank you for your remarks, sir. A lot of first mention there. Really kind of incredible summary of Coast Guard involvement in World War II. Thank you. Our next guest today is Mrs. Lois Boughton, who served as a radioman. Serves a radioman 3rd class in World War II. Welcome, Lois. We're excited to hear your service and your story and your experience as a spar.
Go ahead. I grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, which is right along Lake Michigan, halfway between Chicago and Milwaukee. And I was teaching in a one-room school. One of our reading books had a story about a rescue on Lake Michigan. And I thought that sounded a little more interesting than teaching in a one-room school. So I wrote to the Coast Guard and asked if they took women. Somebody wrote back and said no, but a couple of years later, they did start taking spars. So I had my boot training in the Palm Beach Biltmore Hotel, and we had officers teaching us. But when my class graduated, they decided to start having enlisted people teach. So they sent me to a classification girl, and she asked me if I wanted to go to yeoman or storekeeper school. I didn't really want to go to school, and yeoman was shorter, so I said yeoman. She looked at my records and said, "You had a good score in math," and wrote down storekeeper. Then I was sent to the officer to get verification, and she said they were starting to take enlisted girls in as instructors in boot, and asked if I would like to do that. Well, I knew I didn't want to go to school, so I said, yes, sir. We called our women officers sir, so that the men wouldn't be offended if by being accidentally called ma'am. So I taught in boot for a while, and they made a manpower survey between Thanksgiving and Christmas. If people hadn't gone in by Thanksgiving, it just made sense that they wouldn't go in till after Christmas. So our enlistments were down a little bit then, but nobody thought about that. And they said we were overstaffed, and they wanted somebody to leave. So our officer asked for a volunteer. I decided I'd been in Florida long enough, so I said I would go. There were 5 of us that got sent out to San Francisco. One of the girls asked if anybody had asked for San Francisco. One girl said she had asked for New York, and another one said for Boston or as near as possible. So here we were all going to San Francisco. When we got there, they sent us all to the district office, and the two, the yeoman and the storekeeper that were among us, they got their jobs right away. And one girl had just gotten out of high school before she went in, and they made a file clerk out of her. And but Peggy and I were who had been to college were overqualified to be file clerks. So they sent us back to the barracks, where we became a part of the maintenance crew. So it wasn't a bad job because we would work from 6 till 10, or from 10 till from 6 to 10, or from then until 10 at night. I don't, hours aren't right there, but so we could examine explore the city in the daytime as well as at night. So it really wasn't a bad job, but it was kind of boring. We ran the elevator, and the only deck we had to swab was the lobby. The rest of the building was carpeted, and we had 8-hour fire watches where we just wandered around the building all day long. But so it wasn't too bad, but we both decided we could add more to the coast, contribute more to the Coast Guard by doing something else. So we applied for radio school. We that was in Atlantic City, and we were there for I think 5 months. Then after it was pretty hard getting through radio school, but we learned the code and we didn't learn anything technical. But then I was sent to Cape May, New Jersey, and at that time, what is now the Coast Guard boot camp and other things was a Navy air station. So we had to live in the Waves barracks, and they kind of resented having us there, but the ones that we were closest to were nice to us. But there were 8 of us living there, and we managed to get through radio school. And it was while I was in radio school that I met my future husband. He was stationed over in Lewis, Delaware. At that time, there was no ferry between the two towns. So it was an all-day trip to get from one place to the other. You had to go up to Philadelphia and then over to Delaware and then take a bus all the way down to the bottom of Delaware. So we, then eventually I was transferred to Bethany Beach, Delaware, which was only about 15 or 20 miles from where my husband was. So that all worked out pretty well. If I talked long enough.
Yes, ma'am. Lois, what an incredible contribution to the country, and really a very interesting story about I'd say a pretty little known segment of the Coast Guard from World War II. Thank you for your service, and thanks for sharing your story.
Okay.
Our next guest, Mr. George Ellers, who served as a seaman first class in World War II. George, welcome. We're excited to hear about your service aboard the Cutter Spencer, sir.
Okay. He's welcoming you.
When I was on board the Spencer, I was just drafted. I had my draft papers to go into the Army, and I went downtown to the post office, and there was a Coast Guard all lined up. People were joining the service. That's be there. And I asked the officer, I said, hey, I have my draft papers. If I want to join the Coast Guard, what should I do? He said, Mr. Ellers, he said, if you could get all your things in order, debts and so forth in order in a week's time, we'll take care of your draft papers. I said, sir, fine. That's okay with me. It was only about, let's see, 19, 20. I was an orphan, and I was glad to join the Coast Guard. And I'm since glad I'm still in the Coast Guard. I've been Army units for 48 years. And the oldest one left, I'm 100 years old. And I enjoy every minute of it. We have maybe 2 or 3 left of the Spencer, but they're all crippled up. They can't join the reunions. But it's a wonderful group, and my wife and I enjoyed every minute of it. We just love the Coast Guard. And
We will talk about the
December, that's the ship there. And coming up December the 7th, we have a big ceremony down at the Taney. I don't know if you ever heard of Taney. The Taney was at Pearl Harbor, and she was way on the other end where the commander ships and aircraft carriers were all bombed by the Japanese. So to make a story short, we have a ceremony there every year, and I think my wife and I have been the most to them for the last 20 or so years. It's quite an experience, and the Coast Guard made a man out of me through my lifetime. We were married 65 years, and there's a depth charge. And when those depth charges went off, we had to be going full speed ahead, when that depth charge would pick us right up. They wanted to throw us over, but we came through it, and thank God we only lost one man. He was wounded in the stomach, and they couldn't save him. Dr. Davis was on board then. I don't think he's still around. But anyhow, they tried to save him, but they couldn't. We had a burial at sea, and that was quite a ceremony. So, what else is there to talk about?
Well, you spotted the.
Well, how we detect a submarine? 2 or 3 days we were playing cat and mice. And in those days, they didn't have electronics like they do today. Today, I mean, at my time, everything had to be quiet. Don't do it. Everything quiet. You could hear ping. Sometimes you get a whale contact. Well, that was no good. It was just like that for 2 or 3 days. And we had to be we had to stay alert for those 3 days to make sure that when general quarters sounded, we were all ready to go to our battle station. And I was on a 20 millimeter gun up by the bridge. And that's where the human got hit in the stomach. And he couldn't save it. But anyhow, what else is there to know?
Lieutenant Bullard.
There's the depth charge. They were 600 pounds. As you set those depth charge, 50, 100, 200, 300. Boy, if they hit you, you were gone. We were also thinking another stuff, but it was never confirmed, but somehow they found out about it, and we were credited to it because I don't think anything came up because they would have hit that 600 pounds, maybe 300 feet down. They were just blowing the bits. Terrible. War's a terrible thing, but it's MRI, and that's how you had to play the game. So,
You want to say that? Lieutenant Bullard?
Yeah. We had a Lieutenant Bullard was on board our ship, and he was just a lieutenant. And of course, during 2 or 3 years, he would be admiral, and he was in charge with his dear wife Mary. I don't forget her name. And I think she about 3 years with Spencer unit every year, and he finally passed away. They're all gone, but he was a wonderful captain, and very very strict and very fair.
And he was first ever to board the German.
Oh yeah, the commander Boer went aboard a German sub with a 45, went down in the Tony Tower, but it was too late. The sub was already sinking. They had to get away from it, or else they would have been drawn down with the sub, and maybe been more of our lives lost. But somehow they got back to the ship all right. Everything was fine.
And you took about 20 prisoners. You took about 20 prisoners.
You what?
Took about 20 prisoners of war.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't tell you about that. So much to talk about. We took about 20. We picked up German submarines that were our ship, or we sank the U-175 about German sailors up uh, to capture them, and they were glad the war was over with because they were just like I was, a young man force or whatever you want to call it to go to war or else. But they were happy that they were captured, that we gave good meals, and they were nice showers and bad. They were treated first class. I will say that. And I think we took them to Scotland.
Greenland.
And lots of times we would start out with uh, uh, 30 or 40 merchant ships, and there would be all kinds of supplies, which the war they could use, you name it, gasoline, oil, tanks, parts, aircrafts, this, that, supplies. And if we got half up through, we were lucky. We used to hit a lot of times the German wolf packs. There were 5 or 6 subs together at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. Boom, 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 boom. Boy, ships were shaking. And we chased them subs all over the ocean. And of course, the merchant ships were loaded down. They could only go so fast, 10 miles an hour, where we could go 20, 25 miles an hour. A big difference. And ships were scattered all over the ocean. And we had to try to get them all back together again, which we did eventually. And we got some through, not all of them. What else
I
now?
think that's it.
What about?
I think that's it.
That's it?
George, I have to tell you, that is probably, I've hosted a lot of Coast Guard veterans and heard a lot of Coast Guard stories, and that's got to be one of the coolest that I've ever heard. So, thank you, sir, for sharing it. Probably one of the bravest I've ever heard too. And we really appreciate your service, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
I could tell you lots of stories. And one of the stories I love for you to hear. I want to talk about Acoustic. Listen to this. He was the president of the United States.
Well, that'll come later. You have more time to talk. That'll come later.
For sure, George. I hope this should not be the last time we talk. And happy birthday to you, sir. I'm sure it's belated, but happy 100. You're one of the few I've ever talked to that reach that age. Our next guest today is Colonel Peter Crane, Vice President of Education and Access at the National World War II Museum. Welcome, Colonel Crane. We're excited to hear more history from you, sir.
Well, thank you. And thanks to the National Coast Guard Museum for inviting me to speak today. This is a real treat. I've also got to say that following that, it's also a little intimidating with following Dr. Thiessen, who's already forgotten more about Coast Guard history than I will ever know, and of course 2 veterans who were actually there. So it's a little intimidating for an Army ground pounder to be participating. Now, the scope and diversity of the Coast Guard commissions were so vast that obviously there's not time to enter into any kind of comprehensive discussion about its contribution to the overall war effort. So I thought I'd do a slightly different approach and take it from another perspective. The National World War II Museum started as the D-Day Museum. And hopefully this audience knows that the famous Higgins landing craft were made at Higgins Industries here in New Orleans. So I thought that rather than covering such a wide topic, I'd focus in on a single battle and maybe the quick stories of a couple of individuals. So the battle I thought I would talk about is, of course, given our museum's history, D-Day, and more specifically to today's subject in this group, Operation Neptune phase of the overall Operation Overlord. So the first thing to know about D-Day itself is you will never understand, or no one today will really be able to understand the vast scope of that mission. The numbers are just amazing. 11,500 aircraft participating, 6,000 vessels of all types, 4,100 landing craft and ships alone, 864 merchant ships, almost 53,000 American troops landed on one day, out of 129,000 in one day. And all of that crowded into a 45-mile section of coastline. So just imagine the traffic control for that alone. It's just mind-boggling. And when you think about the Coast Guard's participation in that, it's also mind-boggling. Think about the size of even just the Navy today, and compared to even the Coast Guard. There were 97 Coast Guard cutters or manned Navy vessels, Coast Guard manned Navy vessels that participated in Operation Neptune. Flotilla 10 alone had 24 landing craft infantry. There were 7 different kinds of landing craft that were utilized on that day, and so and the Coast Guard had a piece of all of that. It's amazing. You think about just the missions of the Coast Guard, and they had their hand in almost every bit of it on as far as that goes. And it predates the invasion by a long way. People don't even think about what a key piece of Coast Guard mission today, maritime safety. The Coast Guard was still responsible for maritime safety of all of those military ships that were out there. So every GI you see on the decks wearing life vests was because of the Coast Guard and Coast Guard policy that was put in. But think about other Coast Guard missions that all came into play on that day. Obviously, watercraft maneuvering, ship maneuvering, vessel traffic control. Again, all of those ships in a 45-mile section. Search and rescue. The flotilla alone of the Matchbox fleet rescued over 400 service members on that day alone. Harbor control, and beach control. So there were so many aspects that the Coast Guard was involved in, and they were involved in all of it. But okay, the numbers are mind-boggling. We've already determined that. But let's look at, combat is a very personal thing. No two service members experience the exact same thing. So very quickly, we'll talk about one guy, the one man alone. And I don't know if my slides are up here or not, but I've got a picture in here of a landing craft vehicle personnel, LCVP, or the famous Higgins boat that most people are aware of. We have a reproduction here at the National World War II Museum. There it is. And PA 3321 is marked like the landing craft that landed on Utah Beach driven by Coast Guardsman Marvin Perrett, who is a local legend down here. And Dr. Thiessen let me know that there is a Coast Guard cutter that will be coming into service, the Marvin Perrett. So we're thrilled about that. But Perrett was assigned to the USS Bayfield, which wound up being the command and control ship for the landings on Utah Beach. It had the 4th Infantry Division commander on it. It had Admiral Moon on it. And so it served as a control hub, but also to deliver infantrymen from the 4th Infantry Division on sea. Now, Perrett had a rough day at the office. So he said there was probably about 3 to 4 foot seas. And as they were going in, an Army chaplain got sick and lost his breakfast over the side, which of course the wind blew immediately back into Marvin's face. So the machinist mate, acting very quickly, grabbed a bucket of water, threw it in his face to wash it off, and said, "Hey, do you need another one?" He said, "Yes, I do. That was strong medicine." To which the entire landing craft broke up laughing and cut the tension. He wound up actually taking the 4th Infantry Division commander ashore on D-Day. he wound up going on, and this tells you a little bit of how the Coast Guard operated that day. He also participated in the landings on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And I know I'm a little bit over time, so but I would be remiss if I didn't mention famous Coast Guardsman Commander Quentin Walsh. Quentin Walsh was in charge of 50 Seabees because the D-Day landings were really to establish a foothold on the continent of Europe. And in order for us to stay on the continent of Europe, we needed ports. And so it was Commander Walsh's mission to go into Cherbourg and establish operations and get the port operational. Well, in the end of June, 26th, 27th, he and his 50 Seabees went in, and by hook or crook, over there, and I'll cut the story short, hook or crook wound up capturing 750 Germans and basically convinced some fanatic Germans who were had 50 American paratrooper prisoners that he actually had 800 people behind him. By this time, he was really down to about 15 guys, and got the German garrison to surrender. And then as soon as that happened, and turned his prisoners over, they made him the assistant harbor commander and helped get Cherbourg into operation. It took another 2 months to get the whole port fully operational, but it really was Commander Walsh that was key to making that all happen. So the Coast Guard should truly be proud of their participation on D-Day and in the Operation Overlord.
Colonel Crane, thank you for that. Great to hear that the World War II Museum's recognizing the contributions of Coast Guard members during the war. Those some very awesome stories that you were able to. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
World War II Museum in New Orleans is incredible. It's a must-see when we can all travel again, which hopefully sooner rather than later. So make sure to add that to your travel bucket list. Our goal is to establish a similar National Coast Guard Museum to honor the men and women of the Coast Guard, like the Coast Guard lady we have on the line. If you know that is the Coast Guard lady. I'm sure anybody that's been associated with the Coast Guard recognizes that phrase. Lois, for you, I understand that you've written thousands of letters over the last several decades, including one or two to myself. Could you tell us a little more about that effort, ma'am?
About my letter writing, back during the Vietnam War, I started visiting patients at Great Lakes Navy Hospital, and I would go. I went every week for about 7 years. I'd go down once a week, and I took some chocolate chip cookies, and so I was the chocolate chip cookie lady. But then when I found a few coasties among all the other patients, the others knew that the Coast Guard came first. So if a Coast Guard person came in near them, they would say that the Coast Guard lady's going to come to see you. So from then on, I started being called the Coast Guard lady. And in 1974, we moved down here to Arkansas, and I missed the connection. So I wrote to the district admiral in Alaska and asked for the addresses of the Loran stations and the lighthouses up there, all the isolated ones. And they sent me back a list. So I wrote to them, and most of them were very grateful to get a letter and would write back and say they didn't think anybody knew they were there. But then it just kind of grew from there. They would go to other stations and keep on writing. So eventually I was writing to lots of stations, and I got the Coast Guard directory, and so I had the addresses of all of the cutters and the stations, so I could pick and choose who I wanted to write to. I send then eventually I was sending out about 500 Coast Guard Day greetings that's August 4, and about that many Christmas cards, in addition to all of the other letters that I was writing in between times. Somewhere along the way, I became an honorary member of the Greenland Patrol. The Coast Guard escorted ships across over to Europe, and among the ships that they had contact with was the Dorchester, the ship that the four chaplains were on. The four chaplains were passing out life jackets to the men after the ship got hit, and eventually gave up their own life jackets and went down with the ship. So I was going to their reunions, and one time 3 of the men that the Coast Guard had rescued off of there were came to our meeting, and we also got acquainted with the Army group that was up in Greenland. So they joined our group. Then I became an honorary member of a couple more Coast Guard groups, and I went to their reunions. Among them was one that was at D-Day, and you just said that the Coast Guard had their landing craft there, and they also had something they called the Matchbox fleet, I think, and that one rescued the people that didn't make it to shore. So ever since then, I've been writing to lots and lots of Coast Guard people.
Now you're an honorary Master Chief Petty Officer.
What?
Honorary Master Chief.
Oh, at my 100th birthday, I got all sorts of honors. Among them, they made me an honorary Master Chief of the Coast Guard. So now I have that responsibility too, recognition too. And the mayor of the city of Rogers a few years ago gave me a key to the city when we went to one of the retirement homes that put on a program for them. And then at my 100th birthday, he gave me a second key. And over the years, people have been sending me their challenge coins, and I think I've got a bigger collection than anybody of those. I've just donated that back to the Coast Guards, and they're going to be putting, they came and cleaned out all my Coast Guard stuff because I'm planning on going into a assisted living place soon, and they're going to be sorting that out to not only to Coast Guard places but to other museums where they don't have any Coast Guard. So I'll be pretty well spread around. So.
Well, Lois, well-deserved recognition, and I for one can personally thank you for one of those cards. I know that you made a huge impact sending them, so thank you for that, and thanks for sharing us the why that you did it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So as we come near the end of the panel, soliciting any questions. So if you guys have any, please enter them in there. All you got to do is click the little question mark there, and you can submit questions directly to us to ask the guests. Dr. Thiessen, I've got one for you. Two actually, but I'll start with number one. Do you still uncover new information about the Coast Guard service in World War II and other conflicts, even though so much is already in the history books?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Chief? You're kind of breaking up here. You said had a question about the overall history of the Coast Guard?
Yeah, they're asking if you still uncover new information about the Coast Guard service during World War II.
Yeah, the question was if we're still uncovering more information about the Coast Guard service in World War II. So indeed we are, and a lot of those are personal stories. Fortunately, the last, I was mentioning to Colonel Crean that the service decided to name the fast response cutters after enlisted personnel, which is a first and a fortunate choice because it enlightened us a great deal about what it was really like for service members on the on the ground who are actually operational and doing a lot of the missions and carrying them out operationally for the Coast Guard. So a lot of the recent research has been the personal stories of Coast Guard members, and personally I feel grateful that we're doing so much more research about enlisted personnel and what they did during the past 230 years of the Coast Guard's history, which is what we're really focusing on right now. So that, yes, there's much more coming. We, as you know, do a blog series coming out with a story once a week. We've done probably 250 stories by now for the past 10 years. Each one covers a different event, different person, different story of some kind about a Coast Guard asset, whether it's aircraft or cutters or just about anything under the sun for each of the ancestor agencies. So if there's an opportunity to check out that blog series, it's on our Coast Guard Compass website, as well as my Coast Guard website. Each week you'll get a new story. Many of them are anniversary stories or commemorative stories about the history of the Coast Guard. So I encourage you to check it out.
Always something new, and so many varied missions. You never know what the story might cover that week. So yeah, excellent referral, Mr. Thiessen. Colonel Crane, got one for you, sir. As a museum, being involved in the museum industry yourself, what are you most looking forward to with the National Coast Guard Museum when you can visit it one day?
Well, partnership. There's not a lot of military museums around the country, and most of them are small. And for the Coast Guard to have their own, and as you said, Chief, the Coast Guard's the only service that doesn't have one right now. And as of last week, the Army just got theirs and their national museum. And so it's going to be great to be able to tell more of that story. And as the National World War II Museum, we don't see other museums, the service museums or the World War II Museum in Texas, the World War II in the Pacific Museum in Texas as competition. We see them as potential allies. And it's great to be able to work with other professionals who are working to expand on our mission to educate the American public about World War II or about their services. And so it'll be great to see the Coast Guard Museum coming online and be able to work with you. So that's, and be able to trade resources, educational programs, things like that. So we're really looking forward to that.
Excellent, sir. Excellent. I look most forward to the players, if they have those things up and running. That's what I look forward to, being able to drive the fake boats. But
we did have a PT boat in the water until very recently.
Could you drive the PT? Yeah, now that sounds like fun to me. That's right up my alley.
Well, given Mr. Ellers here, we actually had one of the crew members from the Sudden Jerk, the RPT boat, who was actually a combat veteran in the Mediterranean during the war. And for its inaugural voyage, we had one of the crew members who was on there. And you really get tested when one of the actual crew plank holders is on board checking your work. So it's something special.
I can imagine you're doing it and takes over.
Yeah. Well, one thing that your audience will appreciate is that our LCVP was commissioned by the Coast Guard for one day so that it could be in the water and get commissioned. And of course, Marvin was on board for that. And he actually got to go on out because part of his job in the Coast Guard was training other small craft operators. So he got to drive his LCVP 70 years later.
What a story. Very cool. Mr. Ellers, let's come back to you. Are you still with us, sir?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Oh, this is a story I want to tell you.
Perfect.
Uh,
The floor is yours,
I
sir.
went over Washington, D.C. with the President of the United States, which at the time was Bill Clinton. And I didn't give any thought about it as time went on for this one whole week. They called again Wednesday, would you resent the Coast Guard? So I gave it a lot of thought. And I think, why not? So they called Friday. And they said, this is our last offer. Would you represent the Coast Guard with the president? I said, yes, I represent. And they told me where to meet in a hotel over there. We all got together certain day, and it was every branch of the service, Army, Navy, Marine, Coast Guard, Air Force. And they had one woman there. She was an Army nurse, and she was invited with her husband. So it was quite an affair. And anyhow, we visited the unknown soldiers with the Bill Clinton. We watched right behind Bill Clinton, marched up the steps, laid the wreath for the unknown soldiers. Then after that, we had breakfast together with all the dignitaries in Washington, these big boys around them, you know what I mean. So they had a real big ceremony over in Virginia.
Fort Myers. Fort Myers.
Fort Myers, Virginia. And every branch of the service come out with their bands and played, and we were set right on the diocese, right back to the president, and all six of us, and Bill Clinton introduced us to the crowd again. This is so and so. Just give my name, George Ellers, who served on a special with the Coast Guard, supplies, ships them to go to the Allies across seas. And he shook my hands, each one of us. And it was quite a day. And way back in Washington time, I didn't know this. They always viewed the troops that was left. And they do it to this day. And we invited all the troops around each branch. Bill Clinton, we were right back in Bill Clinton. We shook our hands, and we're set back on the diocese. 21 gun salute. Then what's the flying? The flying angels flew over.
Blue Angels? The Blue Angels?
The Blue Angels, I call them the Angels. The Army.
Thunderbirds? Thunderbirds?
The Thunderbirds, sure. He gave us a great big salute. So that's the experience. And also, if I'm still talking to you, well, about a month after that, I got another invitation to over to Washington Embassy. Not Washington Embassy, but the Syria Embassy. And this was a meeting with all the big officials. Boris Yeltsin, you remember the name, was the president of Russia. Well, he couldn't make it at the dinner that night. I would drive over there. My daughter's husband drove me around. Let me make sure I got home right. But anyhow, it was the 50th anniversary of World War II. And it was quite a ceremony. The wise one invited, and all the big officials, the U.S. company, telephone company, aircraft carriers, all the big
corporations,
big executives from each company at this meeting. They had the first class dinner with Russian service, and they called my name to dinner to come up on stage. I'm shivering. I didn't know what what to do. So I went up on stage, and the Russian interpreter was telling our interpreter about the war and how we picked a lot of virtual rays over Russians, and we're trying to be back. They can't wait to go back on board ship, go back to the war. But anyhow, the Russian delegate gets me a great big bear hug. And the whole crowd, the Americans, business people, stood up to, well, I didn't know what to do. So, to spare the moment, I gave him a great big bear hug. He put the Russian medal.
A fitting tribute, sir, for sure. And something along the similar vein is what the museum's trying to do. Definitely, your service and that of the others that were there deserves to be recognized. So, thank you, sir, for that story. And I'm glad that they picked you to represent the Coast Guard at that event, because it sounds like they got a good one with the experiences you told us earlier. Thank you, George. We appreciate it. Lois, we'd like to close it out with you, ma'am, if you're still with us.
He's still here.
All right. So when you visit the museum, when it's finally open, what do you look forward to seeing the most?
The quilt that forgot now what her name was.
Lieutenant Berry.
What?
Lieutenant Berry.
Lieutenant Berry made. Vince said it's going to be hanging right inside the door of as you come in. They're going to hang that quilt up there. So I hope that everybody gets to see that. I don't think I'm going to be around long enough till they get that museum finished. It's supposed to be done in 18, and now they're still a few years away from getting it done. But I had an opportunity to meet Alex Haley, and I wrote to one of the admirals and asked them if they were going to name a cutter after him, and not too long afterwards they did. So he's got his ship now.
Perfect. I love your answer, and I'm going to look for that quilt, hopefully right alongside you. I know the museum's it's gaining traction and is nearing that point where they can get it to completion so we can all visit. We appreciate that, Lois. We thank everybody for their great questions today. Thank you again to Lois, Bill, and Peter for your participation today. We're thrilled that you were able to join us. To the nearly 200 of you online that are watching and that offered your questions, thank you. The Museum Association, its supporters, and those of us who have served are so excited about building this museum, helping to create a place to honor the Coast Guard and its people. People like George and Lois, who we heard from today, and the collective Coast Guard and what it does for our nation. We rely on supporters like you to get involved and spread the word. Tell your friends about this project, why it matters to you, why it matters to the country. I hope that you all enjoyed today's discussion. I invite you to learn more about the National Coast Guard Museum Association at coastguardmuseum.org. That's coastguardmuseum.org. You can sign up for the newsletter or visit the museum on social media at the links you see on your screen to stay up to date on its progress. We invite you to reach out to us with any questions or answer our call when we reach out to you. Thank you again and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.